Welcome back, everyone. This is Deathstroke9, and today we're going to be talking about a question that I've seen in a lot of the forums that I'm a part of, just something that comes up a lot, and I don't really see any other video on YouTube about it. So, without further ado, let's just get right into it. If you are new here, please subscribe, join our legion, and like this video, and leave a comment telling me if there's any other ways that you would recommend a person get prepared for switching from Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition to the core trilogy, the Immortal 3, the Trinity, really, to Call of Cthulhu, the blasphemous tome of eldritch lore that is Call of Cthulhu 7th edition. So, let's begin. First off, if you are a player of Dungeons & Dragons and you're looking to switch over to Call of Cthulhu, whether you're a player or a dungeon master, one thing that you're going to need to get into your head is a very clear distinction. And I think that this sums up the entire idea of Dungeons & Dragons versus Call of Cthulhu. In D&D, you are an adventurer. In Call of Cthulhu, you are a victim. In D&D, the keeper is to make a grand fantasy adventure. In Call of Cthulhu, the keeper's job is to make a tense, scary, horrific, grotesque atmosphere of despair and dread with a small spark of hope that will eventually be extinguished. So, number one thing you need to understand when you switch over to Call of Cthulhu is that it is definitely not D&D. It is, for one thing, it's like one huge difference, just get this out of the way, is the dice that you use. You still will use pretty much all the different dice that there are, but for Dungeons & Dragons, the D20, that's your main die. Call of Cthulhu, the percentile dice, the two 10-sided die, which are used to generate a number between 1 and 100, are the main dice in Call of Cthulhu, because the main idea behind stats in Call of Cthulhu is that you have a percent chance of doing something. You roll to see if you get within 1 to that percent chance. If you get over that percent chance, you have failed. It's very simple. Whereas with D&D, you have a roll, you have a difficulty level you're trying to get to, which is set by the dungeon master, and you roll the 20-sided die and add modifier after modifier and detriments to see if you pass or equal that threshold that the dungeon master set before you. That's a huge major difference right off the bat that has nothing to do with atmosphere or ideas of the game, but is more of it's just two totally different games. Like, they're both role-playing games, but that's pretty much where the similarities end. So in Dungeons & Dragons, you can see that there is one main thing that you do, is you explore, you fight, then you gain. The exploration will have some social interaction, but that is the entire idea of Dungeons & Dragons, as there's some exploration, which will lead to a fight scene, which a lot of times will either lead to more exploration or will lead to some form of looting or experience gain. In Dungeons & Dragons, you are an adventurer growing in might. The Dungeon Master is someone who's weaving this grand cosmic tale, which will eventually be like the Lord of the Rings, where there might be some bleak moments, but in the end, the good guys are going to win. Or the bad guys are going to win, depending on if you're playing like an evil campaign, which I've run a lot of evil campaigns. It's one of my favorite things to do for D&D. Another thing that you'll notice, which will definitely depend on like your budget, if you are a newer role player, while I would probably recommend you play D&D first, I will definitely say that D&D, you need 3 books. Each of these books cost me like $50. I'm pretty sure they have gone down since I got them a long while ago, but still is an investment, especially when then you need the dice, then you need all this other stuff. So you can go see my video on on top 5 things every role player needs to be a role player. See what else you'll need. But for Call of Cthulhu, you only need 2 books, and you really only need 1. Even players can play with just this book. I wouldn't recommend playing with just this book because one thing about this game is that in D&D, a lot of times the players... One big thing about D&D is that it can't really be run as a horror game because of the fact that the players know a werewolf is allergic to silver. They know it already. They already know that a vampire can't go into a place without being invited in. So when the Dungeon Master introduces a vampire, the players already know how to beat it. And they might not be allowed to have it at the table, but a lot of players will know the stats of said creature because, most of the players will be DMs themselves. They will all likely have a copy of this, or they'll have access to Wikipedia or wherever, where there will be the stats that they are looking for. Now, eventually you start to remember that kobolds have a certain X number of hit points. I've actually forgotten how many hit points kobolds have, but you get the idea. The players will eventually learn about the different creatures, and that will be that. When I run for D&D, I change the stats of the creatures constantly to keep it so that the players cannot exploit this, but other people don't do the same. So, in Call of Cthulhu, however, one of the main ideas is horror and helplessness. So, while you're being a player in Call of Cthulhu, you shouldn't know Cthulhu's stats. That could ruin the game for you. Everything's supposed to be unknown. Excuse me. And because of that, you're definitely going to need to understand the simple fact that you shouldn't know everything. And for that, I recommend if you're planning on playing Call of Cthulhu, you want this book. If you're planning on running Call of Cthulhu, you want this book. If you really like it, then get the other one. They both complement each other. This one has everything you need to be both a player and a keeper, but I don't recommend players get this because of the fact that it has massive spoilers. Although, for anyone who doesn't know this already, role-playing games are collaborative storytelling exercises, so really there's no spoilers in story content because the content is created as you go along, or the keeper or dungeon master or game master has already written out some type of flow chart or idea of what events are going to take place, then you go through them. He or she describes the situation, you react to it, blah, 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 blah. If you're watching this and you don't know what a role-playing game is, then go watch some of my other videos. And if you're a player, definitely get this. It does not have rules on how to be a keeper, but it definitely expands a lot more than this book did on how to be a good player, and also has a lot of options that this book did not contain. Now, one thing about Call of Cthulhu is I think that it's deceptively simpler than Dungeons & Dragons. With D&D, you have stats and stats and stats and stats and stats. You look at character creation, everything about character creation in D&D. There's some backstory, there's an area to put backstory, but there's no real guidelines on how to make backstory. And I know that I have some of the supplements. Xanathar's Guide to Monsters has like a flow chart on how to make a good backstory with a bunch of tables you can roll on and stuff. But in D&D, stats is the main. It doesn't have to be. I don't play it that way. But a lot of D&D's, the rule books at least, focus on statistics. With Call of Cthulhu, all the stats just revolve on this percentage idea, and that makes the game, in my opinion, a lot simpler than D&D. However, Call of Cthulhu is a lot harder to play and a lot harder to run, because Dungeons & Dragons can be played sloppily. If you go and watch Critical Role, then you see how it can be played very, very well, but it can still be enjoyable even if you don't have a tense atmosphere, even if you don't have even a specific atmosphere. As long as the players are going through it, getting stuff done, and as long as they're having fun. I've played sessions with the most absurd things happen, and I just let it happen because the players wanted it to happen, and they're having fun. I'm enjoying myself, and that's that. Call of Cthulhu, you need a full fleshed out character. You need to understand where your character is. You need to have an idea of where your character is going to go. You need to understand that this is a fundamentally horror experience. Call of Cthulhu is a horror game. It's supposed to be scary. Even playing Pulp Cthulhu. I'm going to be doing videos on Pulp Cthulhu too very soon, so stay tuned for that. But even videos on Pulp Cthulhu, what am I talking about? Even Pulp Cthulhu sessions, It's still not Indiana Jones, as Call of Cthulhu itself, the rulebook says. It still is not Indiana Jones. You're still not really an ideal adventurer. It's a horror experience, and you need to cater it toward that. You need to understand that. Go read some of Lovecraft, some Stephen King, some old ghost stories, some horror stories. Understand the fundamentals of character creation within a horror game. Help your keeper out. Because if you do, you're going to make a very memorable game. And I don't say this because I'm biased because I'm a keeper. I'm just saying that, so you can make a stereotype. You can make stereotypical horror characters. That will help. You don't have to make an exact stereotype, but you have to pay a lot of attention as to what type of chemistry your team has. You need to definitely understand the basis of what a horror thing is, especially if you make characters with flaws at the beginning. Because most horror movies, a lot of them have undertones of the victims are almost a lot of times bad, or at least really annoying. Like the bratty teenage girl that's in every horror movie, And the really nice guy that's sleeping around the place. And then there's the drug addict, and then there's the old man, and then there's a lot of stereotypes to draw from, and a lot of times they have problems with them. And that's what makes it more satisfying when they're killed by the psycho killer, who is, then you find out, has some type of motivations. Is he right in what he does? No. Does he think he's right in what he does? Yes. And so that's one huge difference, especially for keepers. Keepers, or game masters specifically, because keeper, you're transferring over from D&D. Keepers need to have a fundamental understanding of tension, where to draw things out. You need to understand how to build an atmosphere by strategic pauses, by evocative description, and by just messing with your players' nerves constantly. In D&D, you don't really have to worry about that as much. So again, this video is about how to transfer from D&D to Call of Cthulhu. And for players, the transfer might involve, some mild alterations, especially a huge alteration in mindset. Because another huge difference, I can't believe I did not mention this already. Excuse me. Humongous difference between Call of Cthulhu and Dungeons & Dragons is the combat. The combat is so out of this world different. In Dungeons & Dragons, you can fight for hours, and I have before. You have this big ending boss type character. He gives his epic, "This is why I'm taking over the world or destroying the world" speech, and then they just fight him. I've got 6 players, one huge demon guy, boom, 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 back and forth, turn-based Fire Emblem or Final Fantasy type content, back and forth, roll initiative, add your modifiers, move around the room, do it again. In super, it takes forever, and I personally can't stand it. That's one of my biggest problems with Dungeons & Dragons. I'm fine with the setting, I'm fine with the ideas, I love fantasy. I only just recently got into the works of Call of Cthulhu. The works of Call of Cthulhu, the works of H.P. Lovecraft. I used to be a person who couldn't stand horror. Okay? So, I still love fantasy. I just cannot stand very specifically the combat in Dungeons & Dragons, and that's just my opinion. And for someone switching, they need to understand that in Call of Cthulhu, you run up and attack people, you're gonna die. There are some very difficult to figure out situations, some situations where players should attack some cultists, but even in those situations, they can turn out to be lethal when one of the cultists is really, like Wilbur Whatley or something, and they're hiding in their trench coat, this huge tentacled creature that's going to kill everyone in 2 rounds. And that's what I love about Call of Cthulhu, is that's a lot more true to real life. You shoot someone, they're dead. They take damage, but they only had 10 hit points, and the gun did 12 damage. In D&D, you have 100 hit points and do 8 points of damage to each other, and slowly whittle each other down by hacking and slashing at each other. And it just takes... I mean, Mortal Kombat works like that, but it takes forever to do, and in my opinion, eventually gets boring, especially when you start running out of ways to describe the same attack. And that's another thing I like about Call of Cthulhu, is that it kind of allows you to attack however you want. You're still going to do the same amount of damage, but like melee attack, they don't say it's called punch. You know, like in Dungeons & Dragons, the person attacks, it's called kick, or it's called punch. He uses his kick attack. How many ways can you really describe that? Kick. He kicks him. He kicks him again. He kicks him again. Over and over and over and over and over and over again. In Call of Cthulhu, they say it's a melee attack. He can fight. So what does that mean? It means he can headbutt. It means he can bite. It means he can punch. It means he can kick. It means he can wrestle. It means he can box. It means he can do all different types of stuff with his entire body. His or her, just, whatever. It. In a lot of these cases. And that's a lot. That gives me a lot more to go off of. Gives me a lot more leeway on how to describe this type of action. And I didn't even realize that D&D was railroading me into this very bland description until I started playing Call of Cthulhu. Now I no longer really regard attacks like kick or stab. He can swing his spear however he wants. If you can think of a better way to describe it, do it. So anyway, what to take away from all that, a little bit of that was a bit of a rant, but what to take away from that is that D&D, the fighting is long, drawn out. The characters are very likely to survive. They will not die. Player character death in D&D is very seldom ever happens, and there's so much different types of resurrecting magic in D&D that it really doesn't matter. Like, people die, they'll be back. I'll be back. Then you've got Call of Cthulhu, where you have someone gets shot in the head with a shotgun. They're dead. They're very dead. So far we have differences. Let me just sum this up. I'm trying to think if there's anything I haven't gone over by summing this up. So, difference number one, they have a different system. One is percent, the other is modifiers and stats and stats and stats on top of stats on top of stats. Then atmosphere and really general idea of the entire game. Another huge difference, I forgot this one. Dungeons & Dragons is set in a fantasy world. Multiverse, where there's millions of alternate Rick and Morty dimensions. And in fact, I think there is actually a Rick and Morty D&D thing. But anyway, there's a million different dimensions, and you make every world that's created in the land of D&D is another dimension that's been added to the many-layered multiverse, which is your creative vision or whatever. In Call of Cthulhu, it's a lot of times modern day or 1920s America. I mean, it can be anywhere in the globe, as Chaos Team has demonstrated by making a bunch of supplements for different areas of the globe, but the idea is it's still going to be in the world. Obviously, it's not in the real world because, as far as we know, Cthulhu is not real. We think. I haven't been having any weird dreams. And I did not recently carve anything. Yeah, never mind. Let's just disregard my last statement, but, whatever. And great Cthulhu sleeps in the city. Anyway. Where was I? Oh, yes. So I'm so distracted now. Anyway, in Call of Cthulhu, there are, I'm so disoriented. I think I'm alright. Where was I? Oh, yes. So, differences between D&D and Call of Cthulhu. So, yeah, there is no real... Never mind. Call of Cthulhu is set in the real world. Call of Cthulhu is set in the modern world. And Call of Cthulhu is normally set in one era and is not all over the entire multiverse that is D&D. And in Call of Cthulhu, As I said, adventurers versus victims. There's also heroes or villains. Larger than life heroes and villains in D&D versus mundane people. You're just regular people in Call of Cthulhu. A lot of times, you are people in circumstances way bigger than you can control, which makes, in my opinion, Call of Cthulhu more relatable. Now, there are people, and again, I don't want to be biased in any way. I like Call of Cthulhu better, as you can probably tell from most of my video content. But D&D is for people who are, trying to have an outlet. They're trying to escape, whatever. They're like, oh, the world is terrible, and I like having this role-playing game which makes the world seem more, or makes at least me be able to feel like I'm doing more. Which is a little sad, but I felt that way myself, which is how I know. Whereas in Call of Cthulhu, it's the opposite. Makes you feel like your world is safer. Makes you understand that your world is safer, except when it doesn't. And that's when it's the scariest and the greatest Call of Cthulhu sessions, remember this, keepers, is when your scenario is so realistic and so relatable that the players have this feeling in the back of their head that it almost could happen in real life. And that is when you've truly scared them. That's when it gets interesting. When they start calling you up in the middle of the night asking you, have you seen the yellow sign? So, to sum up, Call of Cthulhu is an investigative horror game. Dungeons & Dragons is an adventurous fantasy game. In another huge difference between Call of Cthulhu and D&D, I forgot to say this. So I was talking about how D&D is explore, fight, loot. Call of Cthulhu is investigate, then come into contact with the mythos. You either run away or face it. And I think I stole that flowchart from Don't Stop Thinking's video, I think I saw that somewhere else. But anyway, that's the main idea, is that Call of Cthulhu, you investigate. Your curiosity kind of kills the cat here as you're drawn in. Come closer. Let me tell you a little story. You're drawn in. And then you come into contact with the mythos. And you can either run or you can meet it face on and discover the truth. The truth behind everything. What will you choose? So, yeah, there's that. Yeah. As I was saying, Call of Cthulhu, investigative horror game. Also, a lot of times more adulty. A lot more adulty. They investigate all types of different stuff, like drug use. There's some mild there can be sexual stuff in the game. There can be literally anything you want, which is the same with D&D. One huge part about any collaborative storytelling game is that it's as bad as you yourself are. All right? It's as bad as you want it to be. The way I just said it is a condemning way. It's as bad as you want it to be. That's what I mean. If you and your players are okay with having something in your game, something that's considered taboo or incorrect or, whatever, the main difference between Call of Cthulhu and D&D, though, would be the idea of violence, because in Call of Cthulhu there's a lot more violence. Like, that's kind of a necessity. There's a lot more disturbing violence. While D&D might have a lot more violence of running and hacking and slashing, Call of Cthulhu's violence is way more drawn out. It's like the difference between one death in a psycho killer horror film as compared to all the deaths in The Lord of the Rings. One is worse, and it's not The Lord of the Rings. But anyway, this video has gone on long enough, so I'm going to end this off by just saying thank you for watching. I hope that you now have a better idea of how to transfer from Dungeons & Dragons to Call of Cthulhu. And I definitely recommend that you give them both a chance. Both games are very fun. They are both totally different flavors of role-playing. I like them both. I personally like Call of Cthulhu better. Eventually, as I've said before, Cthulhu Live 3rd Edition, beautiful system. And I will continue to find more and more systems, keep branching out, keep finding new things as I continue forward. Right now, Call of Cthulhu is my favorite tabletop role-playing game system, And Cthulhu Live is my favorite role-playing system ever. But, you know, these are just opinions. So, thank you for watching. Please subscribe to the channel. And thank you for watching all the way to the end of this 25-minute long video. Be sure to subscribe, like, join our legion. We are a hive mind. We are together, one. And I recently did a freaking live stream for a giveaway, and we've had 3 winners. Now, if any of you are watching and you are one of the winners, please leave a comment. Tell me how to contact you, because yeah, I've tried to get in contact with you guys and you haven't really been responding, so you know, whatever. Anyway, thanks for watching. See you again for our live stream, for our next live stream, which is called Cold Front. I've been preparing this for a while, very excited for it. It's going to be a Call of Cthulhu 7th edition playthrough. It's going to start, I think, at 5, maybe? At 5 on Saturday. This Saturday. Be there. It's going to be exciting. I've got some new players and some old players. All new to you guys, though. You haven't seen any of them yet. So, thanks again, and goodbye.